Hello, welcome to this webinar being presented by ESS BIZTOOLS to our members. Thank you for your support of ESS BIZTOOLS. And I hope that you will find this overview of research and development interesting. If you do have any questions following the completion of the webinar, or if you're watching this webinar at a time more convenient to you, if you have any questions after that, please send me an email and I will get back to you and we can discuss the questions that you have. So today's subject is research and development update. It is an important one because there's about somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 businesses each year claim the research and development. They all have to be companies. And the majority of them are SME businesses. Therefore, on my reckoning, most of them should be clients of small to medium-sized accounting firms. Unfortunately, many of the SME category are not, because they believed, rightly or wrongly, that their accountants were not interested in being involved in research and development, so they've gone off and talked to other people. I think it's a legitimate space for small to medium-sized accountants to be looking at, to be offering services to help your clients to have a clear understanding of research and development. We're just going to have a quick overview, first of all. There's been some changes that operate from 1 July 21. So the refundable research and development rebate is only available for companies with turnovers up to $20 million. And the rate is 18.5% above the company rate. So if the company rate's 25% plus 18.5%, that means that your client obtains a tax rebate of 43.5% of the eligible research and development expenditure. For companies with turnovers over $20 million, the non-refundable research and development tax offset is the company's corporate tax rate, whatever that might be, plus an incremental premium. Now, the premium increments are based on the company's research and development intensity. So it's very different for companies with turnovers over 20 million. And I know some of you have got those type of clients. I've got them myself in my consultancy business. So the intensity is a percentage of the company's eligible research and development expenditure for the year as a proportion of the company's total expenditure for the year. So we just got to do that calculation. And obviously it's going to depend on the financial accounts each year to get that. So if the intensity is up to 2%, the company will receive a premium of 8.5% on top of the company tax rate. So if we're looking at a company tax rate of 26% plus 8.5%, we're looking at 34.5% for the R&D tax rebate calculation. If the research and development intensity is over 2%, the company then receives the very high premium of 16.5%. So what we're now going to do is have a look at the material which we have on research and development within ESS BIZTOOLS so that you can understand it and hopefully use it with your clients. So on the screen now, we should have the ESS BIZTOOLS web page. For those of you, I hope you're very familiar with our web page. But down on this left-hand column, we've got the various products listed. So what we're looking for is research and development, which is here in the grouped product packages. You just click on it. Research and development is part of the advanced package. And some people have subscribed for the research and development as a standalone product, which you can do if you wish. So if you have not got research and development as part of your package and you're interested in talking to us, please contact us. So I've now downloaded, and when you do the initial download, you'll notice we've got an accountant's document and a white label document. The white label document is there for you to upload to your client's computer for the duration that they're your client and paying services for services on research and development matters to you, because they're the prime group that's responsible for keeping these records. So I think they should have this. That's a fairly unique arrangement, which we have in ESS BIZTOOLS as far as I can ascertain. So I've now clicked on to the accountant's documents within ESS BIZTOOLS. There's a fair range of these. We do have the procedure control form, which is common to each category product package within ESS BIZTOOLS, and that will guide you through the process. We've got, I think the total is 48 business advisory services forms, which cover a wide range of matters, which we're going to look at some of those shortly. And we then have these special purpose forms, which we're going to be going through. And then we got the papers. There's 12 papers on various components of research and development. So let's go back and we'll start with FC 050, planning a research and development project. Which is now on your screen. This will give you some idea of the process that we have to go through. Getting a message here to say that we're paused. Hopefully you now have that flowchart on your screen, and we can just quickly look at what you have here. So the flowchart, we prepared this based on a suggestion from one of our subscribers in Melbourne, who said, why don't we prepare flowcharts? It'd be easier for accounting team members to have a better understanding of what we're talking about in some of these subjects, but also for clients. So this is where you would start with someone who said to you that someone's got an idea within their team. And if they think it's got some benefit, they could set up a small project team and undertake some preliminary investigations. Now, mainly what they're trying to look at is someone else already solved this problem. Because if they have, the Australian government's not going to offer an incentive to a company to be able to repeat what's already been done somewhere else in the world. They can still go ahead and undertake work along those lines, but they're not going to receive a special taxation benefit from it. So what preliminary investigations have they done? We have a link to the paper on research and development eligibility. So if you want to go there, we have the paper now, Research and Development Corporate Matters. That's not the one I was after. I'll just go back. Oh, yes, it was, I think, yeah. So here's the paper, which is very simple. It looks at the company status. So what's the company eligibility? There's the summary of the rebate that's applicable. And it's stressing that only companies can claim this. And obviously the turnover category line of demarcation is $20 million. And we'll go back to, so that's what you can do at any time. You can flick across to any of these documents that are notified, whether they're papers or forms. If the project looked like it might be going to turn into something, it would be normal practice for the CEO, general manager, owner to appoint a project coordinator. And the big thing that's then got to be done is prior art searches, because this is part of this problem of seeing whether this product already exists somewhere. Now, one of the things about research and development, it's quite formal language, prior art searches, and that's been the history of it. It is very closely based on what the government believes is the process within universities when they're undertaking research. This form here is typical of all of our business advisory services forms within ESS BIZTOOLS. This area above the double lines is yours. You can badge it with your firm name there. We fill it in with the company name, a project number, as much information as you want to record. The project leader. It's a very good idea to be establishing right from the outset proper records for research and development projects, because this has all been undertaken on a self-assessment basis with the Australian Taxation Office. It might be 3 or 4 years after you've lodged the tax return that you get questions about some aspect of this material. The person who was the project leader for the initial part of the work may now live in Europe or have nothing to do with the company. There could be all sorts of reasons why he or she might not want to cooperate. So we need to get it documented at each stage right from day one, so that the company has the file, so that if you're called upon by the ATO or AusIndustry to justify various components, you've got them in the company's records. You haven't got to go chasing people all around the world who for various reasons might not be cooperative, or they might not be able to recall various aspects that you really now want them to be able to recall, because you're being asked to supply additional details by the tax office or AusIndustry. So what is the idea? What's the objectives? What's the number? I should have told you, this is planning a research and development project, because the legislation and the guidelines issued by AusIndustry really say that you need to have thought this out and documented it. Your client needs to have done that. Not thought about it when you get a tax audit. Who was on the original small team? So this identification who was involved is very important. And it can also be important for disputes over ownership of the intellectual property, because that can occur here. Someone on the small team might not have been an employee They may have been a boyfriend or a girlfriend of one of your staff members who just happened to be sitting there waiting for their partner to join them to go home, and somehow or other got involved in the conversation about this R&D project. And maybe they've contributed some important information or idea. And later on, maybe making a claim that they're part of the ownership of this intellectual property. Those sorts of things have happened, both in Australia and overseas. So it's very important that who was there, who was involved. What's the result of the preliminary investigations? Who's the project leader? Now let's have a look at what prior art searches have been undertaken. And it's important that your client keeps the documentation. If they search on the internet, they should be recording in the file what words they inserted, what responses they got, and but most importantly, make sure it is dated. Because they may have done their search today and applied and then undertook research and development, and then a year later, someone has invented something, but they may have started first. You could be called upon to prove that. What was the outcome of these searches? We couldn't find anything, or we found someone had done this, but that's not what we're asking. They were close, but. And we then need to make sure the client has documented what the hypothesis is, or a number of hypotheses, or a number of hypotheses within a hypothesis, I think is the way you describe it. And what's the new knowledge that is intended to be produced? Because this is a very important component of the taxation treatment in Australia. What is the new knowledge that's going to be produced? And one of the key questions is, wouldn't this new knowledge be available from current knowledge? So there's some thinking that's got to go on here before your client's going to be fairly confident they can do something. What's the outcome of the core activities that are not known at present? Very importantly, if some of the research and development your client believes needs to be undertaken in an overseas country, they need to submit an application to the Australian Taxation Office, which send it on to AusIndustry before any of that money is spent. Because if they haven't got prior approval, none of it's claimable. And there are significant details that have to be supplied. There's a special form, and it's called the overseas finding. And we've got a link there to it in BAS 5510. So you can go to it and look at it. Now, to take out a lot of the worry on research and development, the company can apply for an advanced finding from the ATO and AusIndustry. They don't have to do this, but you can do it beforehand. ATO and AusIndustry will evaluate it and issue a ruling, and that ruling lasts for 3 years, whether they have approved that. Then, so long as the company spends the money in accordance with what the advanced finding application said, you can then claim that research and development. It takes a little bit of a time, but in the overall process, it may be a great idea for many of your clients to make sure they got that prior approval, and then make sure that's what they do in the process. Who's going to be the project team can be put into this document. The legislation calls upon the company to have talked to some other people, collaborative organizations, might be universities, might be consultants. Who have they contacted to see whether they know anything about the problem the company's trying to solve? Because an expert might be able to say, this is it. I know the answer to your problem. I can give it to you, or I'm going to send you a report and it'll cost you $1,000. Might be a lot cheaper than going down a research and development path and then finding out that the ATO can very quickly establish that that was prior knowledge, and therefore you're not going to be able to claim the research and development rebate. So that's that form. Hopefully that gives you an indication of what is happening in this process. Many people appoint a research and development manager once they believe that this project's going to be a starter. So they've listed the core activities that we just referred to. They've identified the new knowledge. They've identified their hypothesis or hypotheses. They've listed the professionals they're going to approach and any other experts. They've listed any material that they need to identify. They've reviewed all of this to determine whether it could be known or determined in advance. Our recommendations is that your client should be producing a research and development plan. If their turnover is over 20 million, they have to do that. But part of this whole concept is proving to Oz Industry and the ATO that this is a serious activity that you've undertaken. So I think you should have a plan. And we've got full details of that. And there's a VAS form with that plan, which you can go to. And also a budget. How long do you think it's going to take to do this project? Because companies need to be keeping an eye on what the costs are from these type of activities. And then the plan and the budget should go to the board of directors. The ATO expects it to be going to the board of directors or to a senior executive in larger corporations who's been delegated that responsibility. But in companies with turnovers under 20 million, I think it's got to go to the board of directors. And the board of directors should be given the information contained within the plan, the budget. If you're not going to encourage your clients to prepare a plan and a budget, they need to be given those various forms. So you may as well put them into a plan and a budget and do it properly in the first place, I think. And then the board will minute, and we have a standard minute within the system to approve. And that's where we are. We've gone to the stage of saying, well, let's get started. We've submitted it to our board. We're now going to the flowchart number 51. Which is now on your screen. The first thing there, I think, is looking at who is going to be in the team from your employees. There's some procedural matters that we're suggesting there. Check their confidentiality agreements. Make sure their confidentiality agreement hasn't been drawn very narrowly that says they've only got a confidentiality clause relating to their day-to-day activities. That might be all right if you've engaged someone as a research scientist within your company, but many companies haven't done that. Some of the people being co-opted might be tradesmen, they might be general labourers, they might be people that have got 5 roles in the organisation. Just make sure that their employment contracts in the confidentiality clauses are not too narrowly drafted. Perhaps you should get some legal advice. Just make sure that they cover you. But then let's look at the contractors. You're going to have to engage perhaps some external contractors. You want to make sure there's a proper agreement with them, in particular the confidentiality and the ownership of the intellectual property. Now, it's not unusual. Sometimes businesses do allow contractors to own part of the intellectual property as part of a deal to try to get their fees a bit lower. But in most cases, the intellectual property should remain, that would be the commercial intention, the company that's paying the bills. But unless that is contracted for, that is not the way the law sits. So we need to make sure that your clients are aware of that and you've sorted that out with them. And the same thing applies to competent professionals, which could be a university or it could be a professional service organisation. What's the deal? Now's the time to sort out the deal, not in 3 years' time when this invention's worth a lot of money. So what records, what eligible expenditure do we think we're going to have? I think it's a good idea to allocate a project code to each project so it can be referred to in timesheets and other records with a number, and also task codes. If you don't have task codes and people are completing timesheets, they might have 20 or 30 words to write down to describe what they're doing. That becomes very cumbersome and it won't work. People will be busy. It's a lot better to set up a task code list and give everything a number. TC 101, 102, 103, but then a description. They don't have to write the dozen or 20 or 30 words that accompany each of those matters. And what time units are you going to utilize for timing? I think 1 hour is too long unless someone's basically full-time within a research and development project. But even then, I'd prefer to have timesheets, 6 minutes, 10 minutes. If you have it for too long, like an hour, the ATO could claim that that person was doing other things as well as this, and you've overstated the claim. Labour on costs, you can claim that, so we need to make sure we're keeping a record of that. We need to record the labour and the contractor summaries so that that information is all available. And our system hasn't been allocated to each individual project that's been undertaken. Because in some of these research and development projects, you will end up with a lot more than one key item. You might end up with 25, as I've had in a client that I was working on last year. A whole range of activities are going on that have all been part of the research and development process. So we need to keep separate records so that if called upon, the company is able to defend the claim that it's making to the Australian Taxation Office. Other costs, what are the consolidated costs? And then we can ready to move on to the next form. Now I'm just going through these flow charts because these are the key documents and they're referring back to the Business Advisory Services forms and to the papers that are all part of this. So the next one's planning the research and development work project. So when your team gets serious, we're going to go ahead and do this. Whoever's now in charge of the project, I think, should revisit the prior art just to satisfy him or herself that the initial reviews were done properly. Because the company's not going to be very happy if they go ahead and spend a couple of $100,000 on this project and find out that the original prior art reviews missed some obvious information that they should have noted. And perhaps because of that, the ATO is going to knock you back when you try to claim the rebate because prior art did exist. So it's a good idea to recheck, I think. If you're going to make a claim to undertake work overseas, you need to be able to identify reasons why that work cannot be performed in Australia. Not just because you like the sun in Miami and you want to go to Miami to do the work. There's got to be reasons why you cannot undertake that work in Australia. And it's a fairly narrow list. But if you think you can or need to undertake work overseas, you can complete that, but you should submit that to the Australian Taxation Office for approval. So we'll now move on to the next flowchart. There's 11 of these flowcharts. So we're just going to move through these so you can get an appreciation of what's involved. Now this one, protection of research and development. It's the intellectual property. You'll find no mention of this in the legislation or the guidelines. This is your commercial reality. But as the advisor to this client, I think it's very important that at this stage, you are alerting your client to say, well, hang on, what are you hoping to achieve out of this? If you're going to go ahead and spend a couple of $100,000, what's the value of what you're doing? Is this going to be a very valuable product? If so, I think very early in the piece, you should be making sure that, first of all, the company is protected when it comes to contractors and research organisations, but also that you're putting a brief to your patent attorney or helping your client to find a patent attorney so that the patent attorney can be mindful of whether special documents should be drafted additional to what you've already got, and the records can be kept so that a provisional patent application can be made at the earliest possible opportunity. So you're in effect alerting a patent attorney of what's going on. I've seen this very successfully undertaken by some clients. In others, it's been a disaster because they've publicised, they've promoted in the marketplace what they've developed, and then decided they want to go and talk to a patent attorney, and that person shook their head and says it's too late. You've already talked about, communicated what you're doing. So that's what that material there's about. Please talk to your clients about it. The next flow chart brings in some very important words that you will see everywhere in this whole process, and that is the systematic progression of work. The legislation imposes this work regime that your client has to do on all this. So we're saying we've established the project codes, we've identified who the researchers are, we've identified and recorded the hypothesis or hypotheses, we've identified the rationale for why we're doing this. We've then got to record the experiments that are being conducted, and we have a BAS form prepared for that, that you can make sure your clients recorded what happened in the experimentation that's been undertaken. And we've got some notes on activities that are not considered to establish a systematic progression of work. Team meetings to review results. There should be minutes of team meetings. This is all part of the Tax Office Oz industry view, because after all, they're the government instrumentalities that have been represented in this exercise, that they're saying, this is what we've done. This is how we've gone about this process of trying to prove. We put the labour flowchart in here because labour is normally a big cost for most companies undertaking research and development. So we're getting information from their work diaries or timesheets, preferably timesheets. And we've developed an Excel form which you can use, or you can develop your own forms or time recording mechanisms. But the whole idea is that the time that the people claim that they've been working on a research and development project, number one, needs to be recorded. Number two, needs to be collated as to what its cost is based on that employees or contractors' rates, and for employees, a labour on cost percentage. So that's what that material's talking about. And you can see in each case, there's commentary in the papers. That's why we've got 12 of them on research and development, and you can read them at your leisure. I'm using the flow charts because I think this is the easiest way to paint the picture. In this next one, we have the contractors' costs. So the contractor has been given a purchase order to undertake certain work. Not all of it might be claimable as a direct research and development expenditure. Some of it may be supporting research and development. And the papers give you full details of those requirements. And we then have professional service organisations or universities, basically the same approach as contractors. What did they work on? What may have been supporting research and development? And then we've got other costs. Now, some of them can be considered as core costs and others can be supporting costs. And we've explained all that in the papers, how that all works. Under the legislation and guidelines from the tax office and Oz Industry, we then have to prepare the supporting research and development expenditure. You can't claim supporting research and development expenditure unless you've got qualifying core research and development expenditure. So core is directly related to the hypothesis that you're trying to prove or disprove. And then we've got some comments on some of these items. And they're all linked to papers. You can just click onto those and read them, or read the papers and have these flowcharts on the screen to help you get a better overview of what you've got to do, and more importantly, what your client's got to be doing in all this. And one of the key items we've got to be dominant and we've got to be nominating in all of this is, what is the dominant purpose? So for expenditure, it's got to have been conducted for the dominant purpose of assisting the core research and development activities. If it's not, it can't be claimed as a research and development rebate item. And again, all of that's explained. My suggestion, if you don't do too much R&D, that you make sure one of your team members has become a champion of this whole approach, so that you can at least have someone in your team who can communicate and take your own team through staff training. Now, the feedstock adjustment is an interesting area. Basically, what this gets back to is where you are starting to sell some of the products being produced from the research and development project, whilst the research and development project is still underway. And that happens. I've done a few of these calculations. So we tried to give you some guidelines here as to what we're trying to look at here and how you might calculate, because this is a credit of the amount that your client's going to be able to claim, because the government's saying you've already had the benefit of that claim. There's various components of feedstock adjustment. We've got full details in the papers and on the forms, which if we really wanted to consider this, we'd probably have to produce individual videos for each of these flowcharts, which we haven't done at this stage, but if you're having trouble understanding it all, let me know and we might consider it. And then we got the overall record keeping, which is what we've summarised here. So you can see where everything is coming from. We've got labour and labour on costs. We've got the contractors' costs, professionals, other direct costs that are all feeding in to the overall recording of costs. And all this has got to be documented so that it can be submitted to Oz Industry and the Australian Taxation Office. And then we've got the overall summary of records. So hopefully that's given you in 3/4 of an hour an overview of how the research and development system operates. There is a lot of record keeping. I think the majority of it should be kept by your client, and your role is more akin to being an auditor, going through, making sure they have the documentation. Also remember that there doesn't have to be a successful outcome of a research and development activity. As long as the process has been followed, going way back to that original idea, and the very important searching for prior prototypes. As long as that's been done, the fact that something was not a success doesn't matter. The expenditure can still be claimed as research and development, because the government understands that you need to go down some wrong paths when it comes to researching an activity. So that's the research and development matters, which I'm hopeful that you're going to be able to utilise within your firms to service your clients' requirements. So thank you very much for your support. If you've got any questions on research and development activities, please send me an email, peter@essbiztools.com.au, and I'll get back to you. Thank you and have a great day. Goodbye.